Hi everyone and welcome back to unitycookie.com for another in the tower defense tutorial series. This is actually part 2 in a way of the adding in tanks, ground units, and AI, so a bit of pathfinding and such. And since everyone's probably jumping right over from part 1, we'll dive right into this and not waste too much time on anything else. So starting off, if you go back into the in-game scene, we'll want to set this up for use with pathfinding and AI, the exact same as we did in the pathfinding test scene from part 1. So again, make sure you've already watched part 1 if you're moving on to this. We explained quite a bit that otherwise might not make any sense here. So drop in your AI, create the grid graph and everything, so you have that set up just as we did before. You'll also want to create an AI target and set it wherever exactly you want the enemy tanks and ground units to go towards, so generally wherever your player base might be. Just drop that in there. In this case, instead of making it a visible cube, I've just made it an actual, just an empty game object with a one of these tag items on it so I can see it easily. Next thing to do in the scene is we'll need some spawn points for these tanks. If you're building your scene like I am, that is, I think a lot of tower defense games normally just have one single point where all the enemies come from, and to do that, simply create one spawn point, no problem. But in keeping with the way we've done the flying units, I created another group called ground spawns, again just an empty game object, and then filled it with these ground spawn items. You want to make sure, of course, their Y is all the way down at just 0.1 to be a teeny bit above the ground. So once we have those all dropped in, we now have a location or locations for all the tanks to spawn in at, and we can move on to actually bringing in the tank and editing that up. So let's find that actual item. Okay, so if you have the downloaded files or if you have your own, you can drag and drop those right into the scene and zoom into it. So here we have the one that I've created, pretty simple, but it'll work. And it has a couple items or parts to it. I've got the tank, which is basically the body, and then the turret. And I've made this separate just in case at some point we want it to be able to move around and target, maybe even shoot on its own, which would be a nice addition to a tower defense game if perhaps we give it a bit of RTS ability, who knows. So we have that, just again basically the body and then the turret, which is a child of that. And then we'll want to add on a couple items to this to make it work as we need. First of all, create an empty game object which we're going to use to place both these items in. And I'm going to make sure it's at exactly the same position as the tank by dropping it on or underneath it as a child and then setting the position and rotation to 0. And then I'll name that to tank underscore prefab and drop the mesh inside of that. Also inside of the tank, we're going to need that compass object that we talked about a little bit in the previous tutorial. So just another empty game object. Drop it right under the tank prefab and set it again 0, 0, 0 for position and rotation. Let's name that compass. Lastly, I'm going to steal the smoke particle effect that we used for the attack jet. Let's find that. I'll just bring this in here. Grab the smoke out of it and drop it into my tank prefab. And then just delete that attack jet prefab that we brought in there. Make sure the smoke, of course, is set up to be exactly where we want it in the center of the tank. Turn on the emit so we can see how it's working. And one thing here, you might notice that our tank is very, very small. This is something that hopefully if you built your own meshes, avoided by being smart. Apparently when I built this, I didn't take into account the scale that I've been using already. So you'll probably want to, if you're using the same object, go ahead and actually set the tank prefab I'm going to move the smoke out first. Set its scale to be 5 by 5 by 5. I believe I found was a good number. Yep. Okay, so that's the one I'm using on the finalized version. So going back to ours that we're building, you can drop the smoke back into that, and then we probably want to rotate this so that it's coming out the back of the tank, like so. And then I found it looks better if we move it up and forward. So it almost looks like there's if there's the engine up front, the smoke is coming from the engine while it's moving. Whatever looks good to you though. So something like that perhaps. And then you'll need to select the top level of the tank prefab, and we're going to start adding on those scripts that we added to the capsule in part 1, all the AI and such. So first I'll drop on, from the component menu, the character controller, and then also the pathfinding and seeker. So the character controller, first of all, obviously isn't exactly as we want it. We don't want to be sticking to the ground in a giant capsule like that. It's just a tank, not a character in this case. So under the character controller, we'll need to set that height to be something much different. I think right about 0.5 for a height will work. And then we need to move it up so it's right underneath the tank. I found that 0.51 works about perfectly. I could use 0.5, but then it is right on the bottom of the tank, and that apparently I've seen sometimes will end up falling through the floor. It seems to intersect and just decide to go right through. So I bump it up to 0.51 to make just a little bit above. So with that set up, we'll probably want to also turn off that smoke so that it only turns on as it gets damaged. Speaking of damaged, we now need to add the script for the tank. So this is something that we're going to be rebuilding based on the enemy attack jet and a base script. So if you remember from the attack jet, we had a couple neat things on it. Mainly whenever it was damaged, it started smoking. Also some things where it would automatically multiply its speed and health based on the level difficulty. So basically the wave that it's at, the cash count, the amount that it's worth when shot down, and all these things we could build into the ground unit script or the tank script, and just sort of duplicate them with a lot of copy and pasting real quick. But this wouldn't make a lot of sense, especially for a tower defense game where we're probably going to have a lot of different units, and it's just easier to have a single base script that all of this extends from. Just like we did with the tower, we created, or the turrets, we created a base script and then moved up from there with just a couple additions on that. So we're doing the same thing here, and there's now a enemy_base script that you'll want to create. And this, in many ways, is just a copy-paste of the core components from the old attack jet script, which we'll look at in a moment, has also been modified so that it extends this. So this is now just a base class for all the enemies, and we have a couple things that any and every enemy in the game will likely want to use. So first of all, we have the connection to the level master, we have the smoke trail, the explosion effect for this object, the cache value, a speed range, so that way, just like the attack jets, it will have a range that it can choose between for the starting speed, just mixes it up a bit. We have the actual forward speed it'll end up using, the health that it should start with, and then we have the max health, which is used for checking when to emit the smoke trail. So first of all, we now have function awake instead of function start, and that is because we go back to the attack jet and open up the ground unit as well. Look at the enemy attack jet just because it's simpler. It's now extending the enemy base class, so we just use the same thing as again the turrets, class enemy attack jet, so this script is extending enemy base, the script here. And then of course that has to be included in brackets. And then the only special variable to this, the height range, which of course we don't care about for the, or don't need for the ground units that are always right on the ground. This is something unique to the attack jet, so we've kept that one in its own script. Then in the function start, this is where it's actually going to quickly set up that height, and then function update, of course, it's moving forward. But the point here being we're using function start in the extending script, and the extended script, the base here, is using function awake to make sure that everything is set up first. Since awake will always happen first, start will happen next, and then everything else in the game starts happening. So we connect to the level master right away, of course. Then we're going to set the health, set the speed for this item, and then do the speed, health, and max health multiplication based on the level difficulty. But down we have the take damage function, which we've taken directly from the old enemy attack jet. Nothing changed there. We have the function explode, which is again just the same as the old from the attack jet. So these have just been literally copy pasted over, nothing changed whatsoever. Now if we move over to the enemy underscore ground unit, once again this is extending the enemy base just like the attack jet does. One thing up above, we still have to make sure that import pathfinding is in this script since it does use the pathfinding. Also, it's above the class, so it's not included as part of this class in here. Quite a few unique variables for this ground unit versus the attack jet is pretty darn simple here, really, but we have some extra things in here. Number one, going over again some of these real quick, the turret itself, the body, compass, turn speed, all these things you'll notice are simply copy pasted in from the, let's go back to this here, the AI ground unit that we were using on the capsule and all the tanks in that little demo scene. So we haven't changed anything at all in there, other than of course this is not commented out like we had for the simple example there. We want this to be on so that the tank can follow and look at the path, but otherwise it's just copy pasted right in. And that's really the beautiful part about this extending, is that we can bring in what we've already created, this semi-complex script, not too bad, but it's got a bit in it, and all it has to do is extend the enemy base, and now it also has these functions that we'd otherwise have to sort of mash in and copy and make sure they're exact same as this, and wondering if something was broken. But with this, with the extending, we can just drop in what we already have, extend the base, and it's going to work exactly the same as the attack jet does, which we know works perfectly already, so there's nothing to worry about there. So once again, working with these classes and extending is a great way to go whenever you have multiple items that share at least a good amount of code. So with that set up, let's go ahead and drop it onto the actual tank we've created, onto the top level object. So grab the enemy underscore ground unit, drag that in, and then we just need to connect this up. So drop it on level master, the smoke trail, we'll grab the same explosion effect that the attack jet uses, find that here, or you could create your own special one, would probably be a better way to go, but I'll just go ahead and use this. Set up a cache value for the tank, the speed range. For this, you're going to need something pretty high, just because of the way the character controller works. I found 110 to 150 works pretty well for a starting speed value. And forward speed will be set off that, so don't worry about that. Set up your health to whatever you'd like, and then we'll need to set up the turret, so the head goes as the turret, and the main section goes as the tank body. We'll also drop on the compass, and you can leave the turn speed at 10, that should be just fine. Target position will remain as it is, it'll find that itself. And then just drag and drop the tank prefab top level object for the seeker and character controller, since those are simply attached right to this. Here we have character controller and the seeker script, so it's just referencing itself there. You could probably even have that done in the start function if you didn't want to drag it in yourself, which might be a better way to go. Now we'll just need to make sure the tank is tagged properly. So make sure the tag is set to ground enemy. If you don't have that, then you'll just need to add that in as ground enemy. Also, with those tags, I think at one point we might have accidentally added just a simple enemy tag. You should probably delete that just so it's not confusing. Make sure this is ground enemy, just like the attack jet is air enemy. That way it's nice and we can be sure exactly what type this is, and we'll see in a moment we'll have to apply some special code just to that. And then we can apply some materials if you'd like. Of course, feel free to make yours much better than this. So drop in that prefab into your tanks folder, and you should be good to go. Now, I've also made the projectiles into a class and extending based scripts. So if you open up projectile base, this now has most of the, or the only special items from the missile script. And the missile script now simply has its function update, which moves it forward and checks for the target and explodes if it needs to. The base, again, has all the non-unique variables, things that are going to be needed for any projectile, so the explosion effect, the target, the range that's allowed to move, the speed that it moves, damage amount, and the distance that it's currently traveled. And then we just, I just drag and drop in, copy and paste in the on-trigger, enter, and the explode functions from the old, the missile projectile. The projectile cannon then just extends the base, just as we did with the turrets and the enemy units, and I've kept its function update exactly the same. It's just within the class here. Of course, this means on the actual projectile, we need to edit some things on that. So on the projectile underscore cannon, we now have the my explosion, which you can drag and drop in the explosion from the missile or make your own if you are feeling a bit more industrious. Go ahead and do that. The range, the speed, damage amount, I'll set those the same as they were before on it. The target actually doesn't matter. In fact, that's probably something that should be just on the projectile underscore missile, but we can keep it there just in case some other objects might need it, or you wanted a seeking cannon round or something like that. Back in the game level, select the level master and just need to drop in the tank prefab as another one of the enemy prefabs so that the game knows to spawn both of those. And then one thing to check, I myself forgot this, was that the ground, make sure you have a collider on it. You'll just need to drop on a mesh collider or a box collider, doesn't really matter. Make sure it has that, or else the A-star pathfinding won't be able to properly build the graph over it. Also make sure that's tagged ground. These are things, again, that we just went over in the previous tutorial, but just in case you missed them, I know I did, and it confused me for a little bit, so make sure that's set up. The level master script also got a bit of an update, just so that we can use those ground spawns and spawn in either the ground enemy or the flying enemy. So we have a couple new variables. We have var ground spawns, which is a transform, and the ground spawn points, which again is a private var, just like the flyer spawns were. And we're doing exactly the same as we did with the flyer spawns, where one holds the group and the other will automatically have all of the actual spawn points within that placed into it. So if we move down to the function start, just copy and pasted exactly what the flyer spawn points had, except made it the ground spawn points now. So we're dropping in all the spawn points there, same as before. One of the most important additions to the level master is the ability to automatically rescan the graph anytime it needs to rebuild that grid for the nodes, for the AI nodes, and then to tell each and every enemy unit, every ground unit that needs it, to find a new path to the target position. So under the area of the code in level master where we are dropping in the turrets, right about here where we would drop in a turret, we're going to make sure that the A-star controller rescans entirely right there. So we have this A-star controller variable, which I've dropped in at the very top of the level master script. Its type is A-star path, the name of the script that it uses. So if you go back to the game here, and then under the inspector, once you've saved that out, you'll have the A-star controller, that variable there, and you want to drag and drop in the A-star controller object. That object we created that has the A-star path script on it. Back to the script itself here. So we just call A-star controller.scan, and this is the method that will force it to rebuild that graph, which is very, very quick actually. It's not something you have to worry about, but it's worry about normally, but you don't want to be doing it more often than you have to, of course. So we'll just do it right here as soon as that turret is placed, so it can rescan around the turret. Then we're going to tell each and every enemy in the game, so we find every game object with the tag of ground enemy. I'm going to tell that enemy to run its get new path function, which if we take a look back real quick at the enemy ground unit, the get new path function simply tells the seeker component on it to create a new path, which then triggers the on path complete, and so forth. So this is going to build a brand new path. So we've rebuilt the grid, the A-star grid, and then we've also told each enemy to get a new path and completed that. A little further down under the spawn new enemy area, we now check while spawning if the prefab we're about to spawn is an air enemy. This is the same as it was before. We're going to spawn it to the flyer spawn points, of course. And then we'll also check if it's a ground enemy, and if so, we're going to find the spawn point on the ground to spawn it at and drop it in there. One last addition that I believe I forgot to mention in the enemy base, I noticed that since the cannon actually fires 2 rounds, sometimes one will hit it, it will then technically kill the object, but it doesn't check well enough for that, so then the second round also hits it, and then we end up with a bit of a conflict there where it's knocking down the number of enemy units in the game too low, and so you'll never actually finish a wave, basically. So the way to get around that is anytime something has the function take damage, which is just going to happen, we can let that happen without worry, but we first check if the health is greater than 0. So this means if the first cannon round goes in, does the damage, drops it down to 0 or below, when the next one hits, even though it's going to go through and call this function damage, it's not actually going to go through and do anything, actually. So you'll want to add that into your take damage function in the enemy base. So with those changes in the enemy base and the level master especially, move back to the level, to the game level, drop in your ground spawns, as they should, into the variable in the inspector there. Again, you've already done the tank prefab. Again, make sure that's in the enemy prefabs. And when you have that set up, you should be good to go. Just hit play and watch your tower defense game come to life with both ground units and air units. So once again, I can drop things right in their path. They'll work to move around it. And the old turrets still work as well, of course. So there we have it. Everything's set up. We have the ground units, air units. We've got the cannons, making sure, again, they fire only at the ground units and so forth. Same for the air turrets. Everything's looking good. We just have a few more things to add to this series, and we're getting pretty close to finishing up. Hope everyone enjoyed this, especially the AI, and definitely use up that A-star pathfinding script. The free version is great, and you can even buy the pro version for a lot of extra features that are really handy to have. So check that out. Use it some more even than we did in this tutorial for sure, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.